Hi, everyone. I am here today with Peter Hungerford, who is the principal and founder of PH Realty Capital. Welcome, Peter.
Thanks,
Great to
James.
see you.
Good to see you too.
Yes, thank you again for joining. I know that you drove here. We were talking because I've heard your story because, and we've known each other for a while, but I heard your interview on Brian Whalen and Mitch Flaherty's podcast, Broker Brunch. So I heard the story and driving around from Staten Island. So we appreciate your making the trek. But I've got to say that interview was unbelievable. I heard so many good things. I said, I got to have Peter on the show. So I really appreciate.
Hopefully I have something else intelligent to say on this podcast.
Well, I mean, look, even in the last, what was a month or two since you did that, I've got to say, some people, and I'm not saying it's the wrong thing on LinkedIn, like very, it's your kind of career history and this and that. I mean, to me, like when I read your bio on your LinkedIn profile, I say, okay, I buy deals. I buy non-performing deals. I do a lot of deals. Call me if you have something. And then what amazed me, I thought this was really great because I didn't see anyone else do this. So Floyd Mayweather just bought a $402 million portfolio. And you post, does anyone know Floyd? I'd like to do business with him.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. Was that just something that you thought of doing?
Well, I think I could be wrong, but I think Floyd's deal is still under contract. I think, the news these days, the media in New York City real estate is so devoid of transactions that they're willing to report on anything, even if it's just in contract. So, and I see him buying things that are very similar to what I'm buying these days and getting excited about.
Right.
And so I think of Floyd Mayweather not as competition, but instead somebody that I should communicate with and think about deals in similar ways. Apparently we do. And so, I don't think about the world as there's not enough for everybody. There's plenty to go around. Let's talk with like-minded folks and think about, how we view the world.
That's the abundance mentality, right? I mean, it's like kind of putting it out there. So I've got to ask, I mean, did it work? I mean, did anyone say, hey, I know Floyd? It did.
Yeah. 3 to 5 different people that know him in different ways immediately reached out to me and were like, yeah, I'd love to, help make the connection. So I haven't sat down with him yet, but I believe that's imminent. And, it highlights the power of LinkedIn, I think.
That's really cool. But I think some people, again, use LinkedIn for, it's a news feed, it's this, that, if you're looking to hire, but to actually use it as a platform to source deals and look for partners.
I mean, that's a tool.
Yeah.
It's a tool.
Yeah.
And that's what I use it for. That's how I think about it.
Yeah.
It's a really cheap, fast, easy way to get a simple, direct message out to a lot of people quickly.
Right. We've had on this show, we've had several investors, developers who've really leveraged their social media platform to drive deal flow. I mean, I just had Alex Rabin back on the show from Peak Capital.
Good buddy of mine.
Thinking of Stephen Kashani on Close, they post very active with what they're doing. David Shorenstein. Yeah. So it's I would imagine part of this is just kind of showing that you're active in the marketplace, putting the word out there. Now, give a sense of how long you've been doing this for now, and what does the portfolio look like now? And I know you're either in contract or you've closed on, what is it, over 1,000 units?
So we just finished completing the 1,300 unit acquisition of the Sentinel portfolio.
Wow. Congrats!
Thank you. So that was 24 elevator buildings, about 2/3 in Brooklyn, 1/3 in Upper Manhattan. And we're working on another sizable portfolio right now. Can't say any specifics about it, but it's north of 1,000 units, and we're excited about that one too.
Is there this thing? Oh, I'm sorry, I cut you off. So the whole portfolio now, how many buildings, units does this now consist of?
So we own and operate over 4,000 units now. That's not specific to New York City. In New York City, we're still about half of that number.
And where are the other units?
Manhattan and Upper Manhattan mostly.
Okay. Oh, but the other half, I'm sorry, because you have some in Rochester?
Sure. Upstate New York, yeah.
Got it. Okay. And is that where, I know you went to Syracuse. Is that where you're from originally? Or
so I was born and raised in Syracuse, went to Syracuse University.
Okay.
The upstate portfolio is mostly in the Rochester area.
Okay.
Where I lived for a few years while my wife was finishing medical school.
Okay. All right. So you were at Syracuse, and I think your major, your minor was supply chain logistics. Did I read that right? Was there something?
Yeah, I didn't really end up ever doing much with that piece of paper.
No, but I was kind of
I have
fascinated
an
that it's
undergrad business degree, and
okay.
and the way I thought about business school was, okay, I don't want to be an accountant.
Right.
Part of my undergrad degree is in accounting, but I think the accounting is like good
Yeah.
backup information for
Yeah.
being a business owner and being in business.
Okay.
And supply chain management is just all about logistics and the logistics
Yeah.
of being in business. So I look at business school as like, okay, I need a format to how to think about and solve problems. And so, I ended up in real estate, I'll say accidentally,
Right.
but it just happened to be the most exciting sounding opportunity to me at the time coming out of college. And I've stayed with it.
So would you say that your approach then is you're very process oriented? I mean, as far as how you build systems, I mean, I figure you don't just snap your fingers and suddenly you have 4,000 units. I would imagine there's a lot of systems in place ranging from acquisitions to operations.
Yep.
I mean, is that as big a part of your business of actually acquiring, but actually figuring out how to optimize the operations?
Yeah, so very process oriented. That's, we've built the management company, in-house for a reason, and we've built it thinking about things as a process, and we need a process to manage this and a process to manage that, and that process needs to make sense and drive towards a specific goal. So, ironically, even just in this conversation, I said a minute ago, I don't really use the supply chain piece of paper for much, but I mean, I think, maybe I've already contradicted myself accidentally, that I do. I think about every piece of the real estate machine as a process that needs to be thoughtful.
Right. Yeah, I was an English major, and I could say, well, does real estate have anything to do with an English major? But the amount of not only writing a book, but emails, just this, again, constantly. So that's a very interesting background. Now, I believe you said along the way, was real estate just kind of a hobby where you were kind of buying, 2-4 families up in Rochester, or were you kind of born into a real estate family?
No, so was definitely not born into a real estate family. Met a friend in college whose dad owned some buildings in Washington Heights. And so, I had some other sort of boring sounding desk jobs offered to me, after graduation, and that just wasn't exciting. But moving to Manhattan and starting a real estate brokerage with a friend of mine who I thought, we were going to get a lot of, inside direction, so to speak, and maybe even an insider's edge.
There you go.
On the real estate business. That sounded a lot more exciting to me. So,
you said brokerage. So you were renting apartments, selling buildings?
For 4 years, we started just renting apartments, but we ended up, selling some buildings in Washington Heights and, moved into...
What year was this?
It's 2004 when we started.
So what was it like renting apartments there? I mean, was there any... I mean, was this a lot of hustling around and doing a lot of volume? I mean, what... And this is on behalf of the landlords. What was that experience like?
So we would advertise and get tenants, people that want prospective renters that wanted to rent, and then we'd search for their apartment, but then we'd also canvass owners trying to get access to their rentals. So you mentioned the broker's brunch earlier. I told a story there about my interactions with Soleil Management, obviously huge New York City landlord, but this was back in the day where Street Easy didn't exist. There was no single resource for rentals, and so it was just an extraordinarily fragmented market, and you definitely had to hustle.
I mean, I would imagine, you've probably walked thousands of buildings, right, over your life, but I would imagine going in, and was that to learn the business? I mean, we get a lot of aspiring investors who listen to the show. I mean, starting off as a rental broker, if you want to go into multifamily, it's probably not the worst way to start.
I say all the time that, our real estate, no matter where it is, it's worthless if nobody wants to use it.
Right.
And so when you buy a piece of real estate, the right to give someone else access to it and the right to give someone else the right to use it, that is the only thing that has any value. And so if you don't understand how that transaction works precisely, and you can't put yourself in the shoes of the consumer, you don't understand real estate. You can't understand real estate.
Yeah.
So I think about our customer always. We talk about them as a customer. People talk about tenants. In my office, we talk about customers. And we think about what does our customer want and what can we do for our customer to make that transaction better.
I've heard that on the retail side. So I had Jeff Edison, founder of Phillips Edison, one of the largest owners of grocery anchored shopping centers. They actually call their tenants neighbors. And he talked about how important it was to curate a neighborhood and think about, what tenants want to be close to, good neighbors to each other, and how do you make the best experience for them. As far as on the residential side and thinking of, who your customer is, your tenant, I haven't heard it expressed like that before. I think a lot of it is, okay, well, let's look at the comps. Let's see what rents are. Let's think about how do we maximize rents. Certainly, okay, well, what's the demographic, right? So, should this be a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom? But I mean, how do you go about finding out what your customer, your tenant wants?
Well, I bring it up in the context of how I got started in the business, and I got started in the business as a rental broker. And as a rental broker, you're interacting with those customers,
right?
And you're trying to pull out of them, what is it you want?
Right.
What is it the customer wants?
Right.
And so that gave me this like crash course in understanding the customer and understanding that transaction, which, any landlord then is seeking to purchase. So I think it's more so on the management side of the business where that mindset of who is the customer and what do they want is so critical. On the investment side, I do think you can get away like with not really understanding that piece of it as much. Mm-hmm. But like, even on the investment side, when we go to renovate an apartment, we're obviously thinking about, okay, what is going to make financial sense to renovate and to provide to the customer as an amenity. So
makes sense.
It comes up in different contexts.
So how, with Rochester, was that where you started investing? So I assume you've made some commissions. You're looking to now start your own account. So was Rochester then where you started acquiring?
Rochester was really where I started the management company and investing strictly as a principal just for myself.
Okay. What did that start with? I mean, was it like you just started buying
single family homes, single family flips?
And how did so this was your money and you were going in and financing these? Did you have partners?
Eventually I brought in partners once I felt comfortable with what I was doing. I still felt very new at that point in time. I'd only been in the real estate industry for 6-7 years at that point. And as much as I felt like I understood the customer that we're describing right now, I still didn't feel comfortable with the investment and how to run my own property management firm. Again, I'd seen all those pieces of it, but I never actually done it myself.
Right.
And so, trying to layer into that the complexities of taking other people's money, didn't, that felt like too much all at once. So the first couple of deals I did on my own, strictly with my own money. Okay, let's make sure, I'm not able to make too many foolish mistakes with someone else's money.
And there was no substitute for just figuring it out. I mean, there's no other way. I mean, I guess you could go try to work for someone else, but until you've actually done it.
Listen, we take just this recent transaction, okay? And I said this before we closed too. Never have I ever bought 1,300 units at one time in New York City.
Right.
I haven't. I'm not scared of that fact. It's a fact.
But I'm sure you're planning for it, right?
My point is that I have complete confidence and the utmost certainty that it's not any different than buying 1,000 units or 500 units, and we're going to figure it out.
You're going to have to scale. So will you start hiring in advance, or, you're going to get hit with...
Sometimes it depends on the situation.
Right.
Like what I mentioned, we're looking at another portfolio. This portfolio is actually larger than that one. So when that happens, that will be, here again, I've never done this before.
Right.
You figure it out.
And you manage everything in house? Mm-hmm. Okay. And that's and we'll get to that later because I know that's really your value add, being hands on. But talk about how you started scaling this. So you start doing fix and flips, and then what that turned into a 10 family, a 20 family, and then did you decide, okay, if I really want to go to the big time, I've got to go back to New York? Is that?
Listen, I think there's different business models available for different people in different places depending on what you like. Some people like doing a single family house flip, and you don't ever have to deal with a tenant or a customer or a neighbor. You don't have to deal with evictions. So some people like that and would prefer that and would rather try to, scale that business model. I know plenty of people that make a ton of money doing 10 or 15 single family home flips a year.
Right.
Joe Farrell is a guy who comes to mind in the Hamptons. He's working on 50 different ground up projects at any given time, enormously successful. I mean, for all intents and purposes, and Joe, if you're out there listening, I don't mean this as a slight at all. I mean, he flips single family houses. That's what he does.
Yeah, but obviously everything that goes into it, I'm
I
sure he
knew-
has renovations down to a science.
For sure. And his
Yeah.
level of detail is insane.
Yeah.
And he's doing very, very high end. But my point is that for me, I knew pretty quickly early on, I didn't like that business model. As like, I could certainly make money doing it, but I didn't like it.
So how, after Rochester, you at some point you decide you're going to start investing in New York City. I mean, this is the most competitive market you could say in the world. So
Yeah,
what was it that, drew you to the city? What convinced you that this is where the opportunity was, as opposed to going to, Texas, the South, I mean, wherever else?
Sure.
What was it about New York?
So I'll try to give you the short version. So I mentioned earlier, I grew up in Syracuse, went to Syracuse University. I moved to New York City immediately out of college, and I just absolutely fell in love with New York City. To me, there is no place in the world like this place. There is no energy in the world like this place. So to me, this has always been like the Mount Everest of places to conquer. And so, I learned the business from 2004 to 2010. I ended up in Rochester accidentally, like through no brilliance of my own, just my wife's career took us there. And that happened to be a good time to start buying distressed real estate. And as luck would have it, I did that well enough to roll that into a few dollars and moved back to New York City in 2015. And I spent 2015 to 2020 being here, still investing in real estate, but mostly investing in real estate outside of New York, because the deals I was seeing just, they didn't make sense. It was very, very difficult. And in hindsight, I think I was right for the most part, that it was very, very difficult to make sense of deals then. It was very, very difficult to buy good deals and make good money doing it.
Can we talk about, because I hear this all the time, the deal doesn't make sense. I mean, maybe this is a very basic question, but when you look at a deal, define what makes sense.
Yeah, so I'll answer that question for me personally. And I think, right, you've been around this business longer than I have. Everybody looks at the answer to that question a little differently. And it comes back to different people having different business models. And that's what makes like a market. That's what makes, that to me, that's the foundation of like the abundance mindset of like, everybody looks at deals a little differently. And that is like the beauty of it. So the way I look at deals is, I have to have one of two things. There's really only like two paths that a deal can go down that I like.
Okay.
So one is, there is something so wrong with the real estate that I know, and I know exactly how to fix that.
Okay.
And these are not special things that I'm the only one who knows, right? This is like renovations and improvements and, filling up apartments, but things that I know how to do and that are in my control.
Okay. Yep.
That's path one.
Yep.
Path two is more of what I'm seeing right now in New York City, where I can buy a property that's mostly occupied. Maybe I'll get it 100% occupied, but I'm going to pay the bills. I'm going to pay the mortgage. And then at the end of the month, there's actually some money left over.
Right.
And when that's a sufficient return on the capital required to purchase the building, it's this really strange concept where the landlord gets to make money for owning the building and just holding the building and taking good care of it for a month, 1 month at a time. And then you repeat that cycle 360 times. And, then the mortgage is paid off. That's the dream. So, but those are the only two paths. Either I've got to have like a real value add story that I can execute and that I know I can do, or the financials have to just make sense. And right now in New York City, I'm sure we can both come up with examples of like 7 to 8% interest rates, 7 to 8% cap rates, where I'm able to go get a mortgage for 6%, let's say, and there's a spread in between the cap rate and the interest rate for my debt, what allows me to make some money.
Right. So obviously what goes into the calculus of figuring out if the deal makes sense or not is obviously what you're going to pay for the property. So sometimes when someone says, "Oh, James, I can't make any sense of this," my question back to them is, well, okay, where can you make sense of it?
As it should be.
So, again, one of the things I talk about in my book is the importance of seller's motivation, right? Because the broker, seller, they can ask whatever they
right
want.
Now, today, in today's market especially, that is like the key.
Right. Yeah.
If the seller doesn't have a good, compelling reason to sell, you and I should both move on.
That's right.
Because nobody's selling in today's market because they love the price.
Yeah. So,
nobody.
So when someone says, "Oh, okay, I can't make sense of it," I mean, if you have a real seller who has the ability to sell into the market, again, every seller wants to get the highest price, right? I've yet to meet one who says, "No, that's fine. We'll leave some money on the table." But
said no one ever.
Yeah. So, then the question is, well, is there a path where I can make this make sense, right? So I think, how do you, and I think the first time we ran into each other, maybe it was before, but I remember you were bidding on this portfolio that we had on the Upper East Side, and you made a really aggressive run at it. And it was, after, I don't know, a year on the market, a half a dozen contracts. This was we had two warring families. There was 6 attorneys involved in the deal, and every single, we killed one, we didn't. Every single contract we sent out, the attorneys just killed the deal. Like months and months, the market was declining. And finally I said, guys, we have no credibility left in the market. No one believes we could sell. I said, we're putting this, and I love 10X. We sell a lot of properties down there, plug for them. And I said, we're going to just auction this, and we're going to agree to a contract. This is what it is. You all agree to it. And we're gonna auction it, and it worked. And I remember you made a run at it. So how, what was it about the opportunity and knowing, because there's only so many hours in the day.
Totally.
How do you figure out how you're going to focus on what to pursue?
That's a great example deal, because there were 2 enormous things about that deal in particular that kept me interested. Number one was that, just as I was just describing 2 types of deals, that deal had a ton of stuff around the whole portfolio. I think it was 12 or 14 buildings. A whole portfolio. There were a ton of opportunities to just fix things that were broken and inefficiently running, inefficiently managed. There's just so much of that stuff.
Right.
So that was the first and foremost. Is fundamentally, I know how to fix this stuff.
Right.
Give me the keys. I know how to fix it.
Yep.
That's number one. The other important thing about that deal, that, again, talking about seller's motivation and thinking about, especially in today's environment, where does one spend their time, whether they're in your seat or mine, is the profile of the seller. Okay. And when I see a seller who has a real problem that they have to solve, and it's going to be solved some way, somehow, that's a hoop I like to hang around.
Yeah.
And as you pointed out, unfortunately for you, it took a long time to figure out how to solve that problem, obviously through no fault of your own, just the situation, but you stuck with it for long enough to see it all the way through. And when I see profiles of sellers like that, I hang around.
Yeah.
I make it a point to hang around.
Yeah.
My follow-up game is strong.
It is. Yeah, you were locked in on this, and look, once it goes to auction, it's again, if you're the highest bidder on that day, and I would imagine at some point you just tapped out. But how do you cultivate these relationships? I think you said, you're on the phone constantly,
all day, every day.
So what are you spending much time talking to brokers, asking about what they have? You're calling them, following up obviously on your properties, making sure work's getting done. What is that? What does that day look like? Because I'm sure you have an office, but it seems like I don't know why you strike me as someone who's just you're just on the move.
Always moving. I have 32,000 miles on my car I've put on it in the last 18 months.
Yeah.
So Yeah, I mean, I'm on the phone all day long every day, and as the business has scaled from 0 units to over 4,000, my role has changed in that
Mm.
business. Of course, earlier on, I wore a lot of different hats, and I got to spend a lot less time on acquisitions and stuff, like building the business. But I would say today, I spend about maybe half my time on property management and asset management related things. Now that's everything from, dealing with current lenders,
Hmm.
to, communicating with current partners, to helping to solve the more complex, issues that come up, whether it's, construction funds or tenant
Hmm.
issues or what have you. That's about half my time. The other half of my time I spend talking to brokers, trying to solve, contract problems on
Yeah.
deals and situations that I have in the pipeline.
Hmm.
And I don't know.
So
I
we have a lot of brokers who listen to this show as well. I mean, what
Good.
advice would you give to them when they call you up? I mean, I don't. Do you get 10 calls a day? You get. I mean, I'm sure it's a lot. What is it when? And I'm sure you get a lot of these are cold calls. We've never heard of these brokers before. I don't know if they're
Probably.
mostly calling you asking you, "Hey, Peter, do you want to sell? You want to buy?" But like, what is that call that you get from a broker where you actually want to engage with that broker and have a conversation?
Sure. So, I mean, listen, the guys that and girls that know me and, I know aren't going to waste my time and keep me on the phone for, 10 minutes to tell me about one crappy deal, that I wouldn't be interested in. I mean, they get me on the phone very easily.
So they're
Right.
quick. They're to the point.
You're in that bucket. You
Okay.
call me, I answer,
Yeah.
like this is how it works. But I would say for anyone whom I don't know or we haven't spoken with before, I mean, yeah, I don't have enough time to return all my phone calls, text messages, emails,
Yeah.
LinkedIn, direct messages, what have you. I don't.
Do you
And
have
so
an
I do.
acquisitions person? Is it like
So
at
we
some
run a
point?
very lean shop,
Yeah.
and we have somebody that we're grooming right now into an acquisitions role, but like no, not enough to just like throw everything, in that direction and like
Right.
not think about it. And that's been deliberate. I mean, to me, the filtering process, the understanding what's on the market right now and what's transacting and what's not,
Hmm.
like to me, that is
Yeah.
like that's the key to knowing what to buy and when.
Yeah.
And so if I'm not at the front lines of that, then like I
Right.
can't make the most intelligent investing decisions.
How quick can you kind of get your arms around a deal? And part of it, I'm sure, is how the broker is able to present it, answer your questions. I
Totally.
mean, can you get to the bottom of a deal in 5 minutes? Is it like, are you going back to the drawing board? You're
Yeah,
running numbers? I mean,
sure. I'll give you, well, okay, I'll answer that question in two ways.
mhm.
So I would say for me, it's hard for me to spend any time on a deal under like say $5 or $10 million right now. So
Okay.
thinking about a deal size that is
Okay.
interesting to me today, if I spend 30 minutes looking at a rent roll and the situation, right? Because if it's just like boring and vanilla, I'm not
Yeah.
interested. And I've already passed at that point. But if I spend 30 minutes on it, I can decide pretty like from there, okay, do
Hmm.
I want to spend more time on this? Again, the more complex the situation, the more interested I'm going to be. I'll give you a quick example. I'm looking at buying a defaulted loan in foreclosure right now. The owner is an estate that's been feuding for 8 years. The lender has been in foreclosure for 7 years now. And I'm buying it at 30 cents on the dollar of UPB. And it turns out that all of the surrounding properties are actually also owned by the estate. So the deficiency judgment on this initial foreclosure action will just spread to the other assets that they own.
Right.
So that's like a really complex
And,
situation. I
and
looked
I
at it
would
for
imagine
half
if
an
it's been
hour.
7 years in litigation or in the foreclosure process, obviously, maybe that's because it's an estate. Maybe it's because I mean that's a pretty long time. I've heard years, not 7 years,
Families complicated,
but it
James.
gives you the confidence that you can see this through. And
Well,
your money good. It's racking up default interest. You get it at
and it
30
falls
cents.
under that first category of deal where
Yeah.
it's like, okay, I know what's wrong here. I know how to
Hmm.
fix it. Half the problem is just getting to title. You get to
Right.
title and like you've solved half the
Yeah.
problems. But I use it rather as an example of like, okay, I spent a half an hour on it.
Right.
decided I really like it. Now I'm going to invest a lot more time in that.
Yeah.
Okay. I could have spent that half an hour to like, think about that particular transaction, just like set it aside and not, think about it again.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about now raising capital. I think one of the number one reasons that keeps people from investing is the money, right? So, I mean, obviously you were able to make some commissions. You started parlaying in some of these flips. You buy, you refinance, you go buy more. That's how, when we see these portfolios built, that's oftentimes how it's done over time.
Indeed.
Along the way, were you bringing in investors? If so, are those friends and family? Are they institutional investors? What kind of partners?
It starts with friends and family for sure. And that's, who most people are able to, convince to have trust in them. To me, that's like, that is the root of it. I am able to convince people to trust me. I'm able to convince people to trust me now even easier than before, because I've done it 1,000 times.
And are we talking about like hundreds of investors, like a couple really strong, a couple dozen who are real? Yeah.
We don't take small checks from small investors anymore. It's just, it's too much work and headache. And I always look at it like, if I take $10 from you or $10 million from you, I have to take your phone call.
Yeah.
And that's valuable time in the day that I don't want to give up. So we have several institutional capital partners, especially in today's world. Where
institutions as opposed to individuals. So we're talking like pension funds, or we talk really? Okay.
Yes.
And I would imagine you had to get to a certain scale. I mean, where you're graduating.
It's a lot about the management company and the platform that we have in place that, that we've built confidence in, and that, we can take over a 1,300 unit portfolio tomorrow and not skip a beat.
The investor reporting, because that's a big component of it as well. I mean, and again, if you're doing a good job, I would imagine keeping them informed, then that probably also limits the amount of, follow-up questions and this and that and confusion. So are you pretty proactive about?
Very. Yeah. I look at that more as like, that transparency, that trust is like, it's the sort of thing that just, takes years and years and years to build and can be wiped out in a second.
Yeah.
And so we spend a lot of time and money and energy on ensuring that, every single month, like clockwork, no matter what, our investor reports are done and they're, sent out without question.
So so you got 4,000 units. How many buildings is this again, spread out over roughly?
I mean, it would depend on how you would define, like, let's say
portfolio,
a garden complex upstate that has 28 buildings. I don't know. Is that one property or 28? In New York
Probably
City,
closer to 20.
in New York City, we're at 67 buildings.
Okay. And you manage in-house. So how big is your team?
So we have about 75 employees right now, but
75.
Yeah, but I expect that. Yeah, that includes like on-site staff, right? So in New York, like a 50-unit building has a super, so he's one of our.
And are you managing these people too? I mean, are they
not so much me personally? Here again, I described earlier, I spend probably about 50% of my time on like operations and this sort of side of the business. But yeah,
what's your leadership structure then to run your company?
So I have 2 partners. And then we have a CFO, and we're actually bringing in a COO with this next acquisition, hopefully by the end of the year.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. So we talked about raising equity. Now, in this podcast episode, and you all should definitely listen to the episode in the Brokers Brunch. You talked about trying to raise financing for this latest acquisition. I think you said something unbelievable, like you went to 50 or 60 lenders. And you ended up, I mean, this was a cash flowing deal, if I'm not mistaken. So income producing, this isn't like, vacant, value add type situation. You said because of the rent regulated nature, there just wasn't appetite from conventional
I think there's a confluence of issues right now in New York City. And, there's obviously terrible political, what's the word, sentiment around rent regulated units. Yeah. The laws around them are truly unsustainable in every sense of the word.
Right.
But really having nothing to do with New York City or the rent regulated nature of that particular portfolio. I lived through the great financial crisis and invested through it. And I believe that today's lending environment is less liquid than the great financial crisis. I don't know what we're going to call this one later on in the future when other people, start to agree with that statement. But I think there are fewer lenders today willing to lend fewer dollars than there was in the GFC. And so, finding a lender for that, we ended up having to split it in two, and we found two separate lenders, but it's incredibly painful and difficult.
Yeah, maybe we'll call this the Great Void or something. I mean, it's just everybody. So many buyers and sellers and lenders have just become bystanders. They don't want to participate. They just say, "Hey, I'm going to just sit out. I'm going to wait."
And you probably see a combination of issues, like even from your seat, where one possibility is you see deals die because purchaser can't find any financing options. Another, likelihood that I'm sure you're, painfully aware of and are seeing is, sellers getting retraded and the price just dropping because buyers, once they get hip to exactly what kind of financing options they may have, this deal just got a lot more expensive and a lot less attractive.
Yeah, it is. I mean, obviously rates, go up, but I think the regulation has been really challenging for these lenders where, you talk to these community banks, they're in the business to lend money and they've got a microscope on them. So that's definitely part of the challenge. There are no
community banks lending meaningful dollars right now. They're just not.
So, Peter, one thing that you had said that I really thought was great, because maybe the question was asked, hey, where do you think interest rates are going to go? And, how are you, what's your predictions on the future? And your response was, look, I can only focus on what I can control, right? You said, I know what is within my realm of control. So maybe talk a little bit about that, of what is under your control, what's not in your control. And then, how do you, for these unforeseen circumstances, how do you address those?
That's a complicated one. Thinking about what's in my control is easy. This portfolio I mentioned to you that we're focused on right now, and I think is a good transaction that we're going to be doing. There happens to be a lot of vacancy, and that's part of why the seller wants to sell. That's part of why their lender is pressuring them in different ways, and that's something that I look at and I say, okay, I know how to solve that. Give me the keys to the building, and I know exactly how to do that. I know how to fix apartments, repair them, get them ready to rent, and I know how to go find renters. So it's, really, really, really keep it simple, stupid, that kind of stuff. And so that's like what I try to focus on. The other part of your question, how do you prepare for, unexpected stuff? I think about the period of 2015 to 2020, and I remember looking at deals and like racking my brain trying to think about, how do I change the exit cap rate or the refinance assumptions so that I can make sense of this deal. Right. And when I have to work that hard, and 25 basis points on a terminal cap rate or on my interest rate assumption, that's what pushes me over the edge in one direction. That's a problem. That's a real problem. And that leads me to sit on the sidelines and just say, okay, this deal's not for me. So I think now, in retrospect, it's easier for me to answer the question about, like unexpected things happen, because unexpected things are always going to happen in business. And they're always going to happen in markets in general, move up and move down. And if you don't have enough wiggle room in your deal to allow yourself to make some kind of mistakes, then something unexpected is going to happen with certainty. And that unexpected thing is going to run you over. And so if you don't have that wiggle room, you can't possibly be prepared for something unexpected. I don't know anybody that predicted this recent rise in interest rates. Okay, but it hasn't run me over yet. Hopefully it won't. It hasn't run me over because I don't buy deals that are razor thin, like, oh, I've got to walk this line perfectly or else. Make no mistake about it. I am poorer and my returns are lower over the last 2 years, thanks to Jerome Powell.
Right.
that stinks.
Right.
But like, if
There
it
was
wasn't
enough cushion in the deal. It wasn't predicated on.
but if it
on
wasn't
risk.
Jerome Powell, like, I don't know, something else unexpected probably would have
Yeah.
happened.
Yeah. When you have issues or things come up, you would strike me as someone who's pretty to the point and gets things done quickly, or how do you, manage conflict?
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest mistakes I made earlier in my career was just not being fast enough with, making a decision. Like, okay, something goes wrong with a deal. Like, okay, let's not cry over spilled milk. You got to make a decision. You got to move fast. You got to pivot. When I see what I think is the solution to a problem, like, I don't care if it's going to hurt anybody's feelings. I don't care if it's going to upset anybody. I don't care if it requires firing this vendor or that person or talking to this partner about a change. Like, here's the solution. I'm going for it.
Yeah.
Get out of my way.
Yeah. Yeah. I've noticed over the years and kind of listen to other brokers who, there's, kind of the story. And I mean, you kind of even talked about, brokers who get right to the point and those who, can kind of go on. And I think just, we're in a business where time is money, right? And the longer time, I mean,
we're all specking our time.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what we do.
So, talk a little bit more about, as far as you grow this portfolio, what is the ultimate goal? I mean, is it just continue to acquire more units? I mean, how, and are you just being opportunistic along the way, or is there actually like a strategic plan of, where you want to be in the next 5-10 years? Yeah,
no particular like number of units goal or anything like that. Because I think in terms of systems and processes, I really like having a machine that is functioning, that doesn't require my, minute by minute input. So, I'm motivated to continue to improve that machine.
Right.
I think markets go up and markets go down, and that's like how markets work. And so I'm really focused on this moment and this market of like grabbing and vacuuming up as much as I possibly can, because I think this is a fantastic like moment in time that I might not see again until I'm well into my 50s. And so I wouldn't say there's a particular goal in mind, but I like thinking of us as, a responsible manager in an industry where, there's not a lot of people that have a reputation for being one. I like thinking of us as a responsible steward of capital where, we have a system and a platform and a process in place that, does that efficiently. And that starts with the investment decision, but then goes all the way through to, completing a transaction. So that whole life cycle is fun for me. And
is that why, I mean, and you just see yourself continuing to do it? Is the goal the cash flow? I mean, I would have to imagine if you wanted to just sell off the entire portfolio right now, you could be hanging out on a beach right now. And yet we are grinding things out in New York. So like, is it just the thrill of the hunt? Is this something you just keep doing? Like, or is it a point where you're like, okay, I'm good? No. It's
a good way of directly asking. So yeah, I like the game. Yeah. It's fun. Yeah. And it's interesting. And I suppose it could stop being interesting and fun someday. But like, I'll give you an example. So, I've been in several 1031s over the years, and every single time I'm in a 1031, I end up in some way, shape, or form looking at single tenant, triple net lease deals. Yeah, I don't own a single tenant, triple net.
It'd be so much easier too.
It would be, wouldn't it? It's a really sexy, fun dream to think about. Just cash in all my chips, put it in Walgreens, and call it a day.
Until they vacate, yeah.
Correct. Right now, you've got every idiot who's holding on to a Walgreens that they bought for a 4 cap in the last 10 years, kicking themselves in the butts and losing money hand over fist. That dream doesn't exist. The dream of having a machine that manages an asset class that I think I know intimately and understand precisely, okay, that dream exists, and that's the dream I'm living right now.
But it's hard work. I mean, how many hours, to own and manage, the management piece alone. I mean,
ask me how many customers have called me recently to thank me.
Right.
Okay. Not one. It's not that kind of business. It's not a feel-good business from like the transaction standpoint and the customer standpoint. But it is still, for me personally, it is still a feel-good business in that like we do a lot of work to take care of buildings and manage a portfolio and manage a business plan and manage capital. And yes, that takes a lot of work.
So what's the advice to someone looking to get into investing? I mean, maybe it's a student, maybe it's someone who's a brokerage. Is it just, hey, just start going and flipping homes and figuring it out? Is it going and working for someone like you? I mean, what's the going to school? I mean, what's the right path?
So I'm involved in Syracuse University alumni.
Yeah. They got a great real estate program there.
They do.
Yeah. They actually came to visit here at our office.
And a lot of, Syracuse alum here, in New York City, in a lot of different all over the industry. But so I get asked that question by, sophomores and juniors and seniors all the time from Syracuse.
Right.
And my advice is always the same, which is, you have to go somewhere where you're going to see transactions. So I actually encourage people to go to brokerages, whether that be debt brokerages or investment sales brokerages. My advice is the same. You got to go somewhere where you're going to see transactions. So for the last 2 summers, I've had the same intern on our team from Syracuse University's real estate program. And I'm helping him get onto a team right now with like a super high performer, who does a ton of business, because that is where this 21-year-old kid who's never worked in real estate, doesn't actually know what goes into seeing a transaction all the way through. That's where he's going to see not just like the 3 transactions I might do for the year. He's going to see like 300 transactions.
Yeah.
And you might not be super in-depth involved in every single one of those, but that's my advice to anybody trying to get into the real estate business, is that the brokerage business is where you're going to see a lot of transactions, hopefully, and where you're going to get a lot of exposure to how the industry operates.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Peter, I love that advice. And I think, working for someone who's busy, right? And that's how I learned, working alongside Bob Knackel. And it's not like he said, James, I'm going to sit you down and teach you the real estate business. I was just like, hey, try to keep up, and I think, this is also a business where you learn by listening. So Peter, this has been amazing. Really appreciate you coming in,
thanks for having me
sharing your story. I mean, this is super exciting. Congrats.
You made me talk way too much. I didn't get to ask any questions.
Well, we could certainly flip the script in the future, but congrats on the 1,300 units. Congrats on this next deal that's even bigger and better. And I hope on the next time we meet and sit down, you'll talk about doing a deal with Floyd. I love the fact that you put that out there. So really appreciate you coming again.
All right. Well, thanks again for having me, James.
And thank you everyone for joining. As always, you can go to jamesnelson.com, built this site for you. That's where you can find out the notes for today's show, how to connect with Peter. There's also a lot of helpful resources there. So I don't know how you couldn't get a lot out of this show. So the best thing you can do is forward this to someone that you think could benefit from this. That's a great way to get the word out there. We're helping people to gain the insider's edge to real estate investing so you can outperform the market. Thanks again for listening. Until next week.